Hello and welcome back to another update in the Israeli-Palestinian war. I decided to make this again because it's been highly requested that I return to making these, and I decided to start a new style since it's been quite a while since my last one. And this one I'll go more in depth as to what is actually happening, because the same style that I used in the Russo-Ukrainian war doesn't really adapt that well to this one. So we start out by looking at what the general situation is now here after the last update. And what we see is that the situation right now is mainly focused around the Khan Yunis area. The Khan Yunis area here to the south of the Gaza Strip is the main area for the Palestinian forces now that the Israelis have captured most of Gaza City. With this, we see that the main centers, the command center and so on of the Hamas forces is actually located here in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip in the Khan Yunis area. The reason for this is we see that this is the central part of what is left. The Rafah area is largely untouched by the Israeli forces, but there's also a very large concentration of civilians in that area. Neither side has an interest in fighting in that area, therefore the fighting is focused in areas that are largely left by the civilian population, which is in the north in the Gaza area, as well as in the Khan Yunis area in the northeastern parts. The western parts and southern parts are largely untouched. There's going to be a lot of airstrikes by the Israeli forces in all of these areas, but for ground units there'll be no movement there until the Israelis manage to gain full control over these areas. I've left a lot of these emoticons that are representing the fighting that is reported in the different areas, and these are all within the areas occupied by the Israeli forces. We see that the areas throughout the front where the Israelis are fighting are within the areas that they quote-unquote control. The reason for this is that the areas they control, they do not really control, or not as much as is represented with the map. The reason for this is that the Palestinian fighters, the Hamas fighters, are in the tunnels. They aren't really on the surface except for when they are actually fighting. 90% of the time they're in the tunnels. That is why, although the Israelis hold an area, they don't really control it until they've removed all of the tunnels. This is one of the reasons they have left the Beit Hanoun areas. The Israeli soldiers evacuated their personnel from the Beit Hanoun area, which has been a center of fighting since the very start of the Israeli operation inside the Gaza Strip. When they first started out doing their night raids, it was here in the northern direction, and since then they launched operations inside Beit Hanoun and fought over it. However, they have now retreated for it. Some of the reasons why they retreated from it is, first off, they have achieved some of their goals in this direction. They've managed to destroy the infrastructure of Hamas fighters, they've destroyed some of these tunnels, and they've limited the capacity of the Hamas fighters in this direction. So we're seeing that the Israelis have captured large parts, most of the Gaza, northern part of the Gaza Strip. The reason they are now limiting the amount of areas where they are actually fighting to Gaza City itself and the Jabalia camp area is because that is the main areas of the Hamas fighters. The Beit Hanoun area is sort of a military outpost, while the Gaza City and Jabalia camp areas are large enough to both include the main command centers as well as military outposts. So what we are seeing is that the Israelis are now focusing rather on taking down the command of the Hamas fighters rather than defeating Hamas itself. If they manage to get rid of the leadership of Hamas, if they manage to get rid of the command structure of Hamas, that is when they have the ability to win. They cannot fight the ground soldiers of the Hamas fighters to win, because they'll just drag out the war, and that is not something that they're interested in. They're really interested in finishing this war as soon as possible. So to explain further how this fighting is taking place, let's imagine this scenario exactly as it happens on the ground. We first see a step, which is the step of Israeli forces entering the Gaza Strip. To fight in the Gaza Strip for months, which they have by now, they need to establish military bases and command centers within the Gaza Strip. That is where we get this video here. where we see Israeli forces demolishing buildings in the Al-Shati camp area, where they are building a command center in the ruins of these demolishments. So after they demolish these areas, they actually build their own camps, they build their own bases in the areas that they demolished, so they clear the buildings in the area to build their own. That is something that is required to continue these long-term offensive operations. And this is definitely going to be long-term, because it seems so far that despite almost 3 months passing since the start of the war, the Hamas fighters still have and show that they're continuing and able to continue fighting this war. It is unknown how much resources they have, how many supplies they have, if they're able to fight for years or just months. That is completely unknown. Because unlike the Israelis, who have what will eventually be an endless supply of ammunition, food, water, supplies, materials for their forces inside of the Gaza Strip, the Hamas fighters do not have a supply, they do not have a production. All that they have is what they had prepared before the war. Something to notice, though, is the fact that the officials from Hamas said that they wanted an endless war. An endless war, which we have seen throughout the world over the past century, is wars that last for 10 or 20, 30 years. If that is what they want, then they would have at least prepared for a year of fighting. We do not know how much they have available, but there's definitely the risk of this war going on for months and months and months, depending on how much supplies Hamas has in stock. Compared to that, the only limitations Israel really has is the amount of civilians that they have killed through this conflict. Over 20,000 civilians in the Gaza Strip have been killed. That is without noting all the suffering that is being suffered by the civilians in the area for no food, no water, no medicine, all of these hospitals that have been occupied. All of these are detrimental to the Israeli cause because, in the end, it makes them widely unpopular on the whole world stage, considering that the majority of nations, over 2/3 of the United Nations, vote for an immediate ceasefire that is against the interests of the Israelis. They want the war to continue until they win militarily. This raises a question. How long are they going to fight? Because if we take a look at these pictures here, we first see a time lapse of the 7th of October to December Khan Yunis, and we see just how demolished it has become after the fighting. We also see here a second picture which also shows the demolishments, the destruction that has happened in the Gaza Strip. And this is just parts that are recently fought in compared to the parts in the north that has been fought in for now 2 months. The utter destruction in these areas makes it completely unlivable. The point is, the world expects that after this war, the Palestinians can return to their homes, rebuild their homes, and continue living. But that is very difficult when water treatment plants have been destroyed, when the hospitals have been destroyed, when universities, schools, and houses have been destroyed. It makes the area completely unlivable. There are areas that are completely cleared to the roots. There's nothing that can be built there while 2 million people are without homes. 90% of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip do not have a home right now. They are refugees within Gaza. All of this, that means 2 million people who needs to live on the streets while they rebuild the Gaza Strip. That is not possible for the local population. It would need essentially many countries going there and helping them rebuild these buildings, homes, and so on. And all of this while they are being provided for. How are they going to provide for 2 million people in such a small area with 8 trucks? How are the 8 trucks going to help? They would need thousands of 8 trucks. Prior to the war, over 500 8 trucks would enter Gaza Strip every day. Since the war started, about 2,000, 3,000 have entered. They are already at a very large deficit of 8 trucks. So a lot more needs to be sent in for them to be able to cover the needs of the civilians. And that is besides all the materials needed to rebuild these buildings, houses, universities, hospitals, water treatment plants, and everything else needed. So Gaza is essentially completely unlivable. There's very unlikely that there's going to be people living there in the next 5 to 10 years. That is just out of the top of my head. Shoot from the hip. I don't know. But look at the picture. They speak for themselves. And based on all of that information, we see that in the end, the biggest losers of wars are the civilian population. They are the ones who suffer the most from these conflicts. We see that the consequences of this war are very heavy, which is likely the message that Israel wants to send, that if anyone attacks them, then they'll just attack back 8,000-fold to prevent any future attacks. But in the end, when you're occupying someone, you can't expect anything else than resistance. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.